Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger. Hello, everybody. This is Gilgamesh, and this is part of my ongoing series on the book of Isaiah. So, if you're interested in that, I have a playlist put together that will take you through everything that we've gone through so far. We're all the way into chapter 10 right now. For anybody that's newly subscribed, check it out. If you're not subscribed, do that now. Also, give me a like. We're picking up today in Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5. And if you were with us in the last episode, we talked about that there was a possibility that there should be a portion inserted here from way back in chapter 5, particularly chapter 5, verses 26 through 30, might be a preface to this poem or a opening to this poem, because it also talks about the Assyrian invasion. It has the army coming in with a flag being raised up and whistling for them from the ends of the earth, and they come in with chariots and nobody's slumbering or sleeping, and it's like a whirlwind, like a roaring lion, like the roaring of the sea, and it comes in rushing in, these invaders. And so that may be a introduction to this portion of the poem. I'm not totally convinced. I don't have a very strong opinion one way or another. The reason that it might go there is because the verse before that, chapter 5, verse 25, has the same refrain as the poem that we just went over. And so the first four verses of chapter 10 clearly belong to the poem that is at the end of chapter 9. And so something to understand about this is that chapter divisions and even verse divisions are something that came much later. And there's not full agreement as to where they should actually land. It can get very complicated, and there can often be much disagreement over how they should line up. As you're reading this or any section of the Hebrew Bible, always pay close attention and don't just casually read over it, but ask yourself if this line connects with the line before it, or if perhaps you are starting a passage that is new and gone on to a new segment of the text. That happens frequently, and this chapter is a great example of that. Those first four verses clearly belong to the end of verse 9. And then today we're going to look at verses 5 through 19, which is a new poem here about the king of Assyria. Then there are verses 20 through 27, which are yet another new poem. And then there is a short poem, verses 28 through 32, which is yet another poem. And then the verses 33 and 34 are a new poem again, but they seem to be a poem that spills over into chapter 11 and should actually probably be part of that chapter. So that is a total of 5 poems in chapter 10, one on each end of it, flowing over into the other chapter. So 9 finishes up here and 11 starts here. And so you can't just go by chapter divisions as to where the text actually breaks up. You have to look at it very closely and figure out where there are logical breaks in the text. Now, sometimes it's not clear and sometimes there's not agreement on it, but sometimes it's also obvious. Sometimes they use certain introductory phrases that make it clear that we're moving on to a new poem. As you go through this, think about those things and try and identify those introductory phrases so you can see where the thoughts have changed. Now, that's not to say that the poems are completely unrelated. They were grouped thematically, and they do have some shared imagery between them, but they are also quite different. And so it was sort of that when this book was being compiled, they obviously had a lot of this that was composed, probably orally, that they were then placing into a written text. And they put together the sections that really seem to go together. So there's a bit of a flow and a theme to it, even though the style and the formatting of the poem changes, there seems to be a overall connecting imagery to them. Keep that in mind. Let's get into what it actually says here. It opens with this very dramatic, "Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger, the staff in their hands is my fury." Very dramatic opening. "Against a hypocrite nation I sent him, and against the people of my wrath I command him." Very emphatic here, very powerful opening. There's 2 verbs here, I sent him and I commanded him. Those are 2 words in Hebrew. The I sent him is a single word, I commanded him is a single word. And the way it works is the him on the end is a suffix called a pronominal suffix. It has what's called an energic noon on it. This is a unusual formation, and to be honest, we don't really know why it exists. It's just there in a few places, and it may be that Isaiah is invoking some type of an old-fashioned language or a higher register of diction here. Energic is where linguists have basically thought that this was to express energy. And so it may be that this is being used for emphasis, like overemphasizing a word or something like that. That is one theory as to what this is. But again, we don't really know. Nobody left us behind a grammar book of why they do some of these odd things in places. And it's up to us to try and identify the patterns. And we haven't seen a completely clear pattern around when these kind of extra energic noons show up. Not to be confused with a paragogic noon, which is one that adds at the end of the verb, which is a little bit more common. If you get into the details of Hebrew, that's the fun stuff you get to worry about. But he's probably invoking some type of a very dramatic or higher register here as he reads this. So he sent him and he's commanded him to spoil, and plunder, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. Okay, he's being sent to tread people down and to take all their stuff. And the word for spoil here is shalal, and the word for plunder here is baz. And you might recognize those as two words that are in the name of Isaiah's second son, who was the third wonderful child that we have discussed so far. In fact, it's very alliterative here, which I tried to capture a little bit with saying spoil, and plunder, because that's what it does in the Hebrew there. It's called a cognate accusative, where the verb and the direct object are from the same root. But in Hebrew, it's lishlo shalal valaboz baz. And I hope you can hear there's this rhythmic sound to it, to spoil, and to plunder. Lishlo shalal valaboz baz. We have this dramatic opening. He's going to tread them down and take all their stuff. Then we turn it around here as to why he's actually doing this. But he does not so intend. His heart does not so think. But in his heart is to exterminate and to cut off nations, not a few. He's not really in it for any good reason. He's not doing it because the Lord commands him to. He's doing it because he's a dictator. And this is what dictators do. He's coming in and he's taking everything, and he's taking it by force. For he says, are not my commanders altogether kings? So this is the idea that he has this peerless army of warrior noblemen, with every field commander being their own king. So yes, all of his followers get the best stuff. They are the most powerful people on earth, and loyalty is what it's about. The word here for commanders is the word sar, which often is translated as prince. In fact, it was the title for Prince of Peace for the fourth wonderful child was Sar Shalom. But here, these are not Sar Shalom. These are princes of war. Not only are they princes, they are kings, malakim. He's describing his invading army here as being this elite, untouchable group that are beyond any type of accountability. And then he portrays here his march. Is not like Gilgamesh, Calno, is not like Arpad, Hamath, is not like Damascus, Samaria. These names at first may sound just foreign to you, but he's tracing a line of march. Gilgamesh, Calno, Arpad, Hamath, Damascus, Samaria, right to the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. These all form a line. What we're talking about here is this is a series of cities that were conquered, starting at about 740 BCE and going through maybe about 717. And the thing here is no one can stand before the might of Assyria. He's coming down and he's destroying everything. It is probably about a month's march to go down through this path here, at least according to Google Maps. The city orders on this, sometimes in a lot of English translations, they jostle them up a bit, which is unfortunate because they are in a geographic order. So I've, in my translation, put them in the actual order they appear in the Hebrew. If you see them in other English translations that are not in this order, it's just wrong. But the idea here is they're starting all the way up at the Euphrates River, where they started conquering, and they're coming right down south into Israel. There's actually not that bad of an elevation gain, but You do have to cross time zones, so plan accordingly. But as they come down, every one of these cities has fallen to the Assyrian onslaught. And we come then to the last two cities, Damascus, which is the capital of Aram or Syria. Now, don't confuse Assyria with Syria. They are two different countries. Assyria is the one that is attacking, and Syria is the one who has formed an alliance with the nation of Israel and is defending that against Assyria. Syria is actually called Aram in the Hebrew. Blame the Greeks for why they sound so similar. As Assyria comes down and conquers these cities, it conquers first Israel's ally, and then it will conquer Israel itself with their capital of Samaria. This represents this unstoppable march going forward. And he says here in verse 10, as my hand has found the kingdom of the idols, whose carved images were greater than those of Jerusalem and Samaria. It's kind of interesting. Basically, this is the king of Assyria speaking here, and he's saying these other kingdoms had better looking idols than you guys did, which hopefully they do, because Jerusalem and Samaria should not have idols. But from the king of Assyria's perspective here, he's saying their gods look fancier than yours. This interesting thing here, my hand has found the kingdom of idols. This word idols is very interesting. There's some debate over exactly what it means. The word here is elil. It can mean without value or insignificant. Robert Alter comes up sometimes with a great translation for it as ungods, or perhaps it's a diminutive that's meant to be a bit of an insult and maybe like godlet or something like that, but the kingdom of the little gods, as opposed to Assyria, which is the kingdom of their mighty gods. And he's coming to Jerusalem and Samaria, who have even less impressive gods to protect them, is the idea that we're getting here. He's marching down here, and then he says, my hand has found the kingdom of the Elil, which are these little gods, whose pessels, whose carved images, the word is pesel, are greater. So we have two different words here for false gods, Elil and then pesel. Verse 11, shall I not, as I have done to Samaria and her images, thus shall I do to Jerusalem and her idols. This actually helps us put a possible time frame around this. It sounds like he has already destroyed Samaria. That would put this after 722 BCE. He will indeed come for Jerusalem next. And that's what it's saying is, just like I was able to wipe out Samaria, I'm coming to Jerusalem. This is the terrifying part of Isaiah's prophecy, is that he is explaining very clearly that this isn't over yet. Just watching the northern kingdom be destroyed and watching their people get deported had to be terrifying, but they're coming for Jerusalem. Again, Samaria and her ungods, her Elilim. It's been suggested that that word Elilim might be a play off the word El, which means God, and the word Al, which means not God. I don't know that I completely buy into that etymology, but that is something that's been suggested by reputable folks. But it's definitely a derogatory statement about this. It's not a thing that somebody would refer to their own gods as. This is meant to be an insulting term. So, as I've done to Samaria and her ungods, thus shall I do to Jerusalem and her idols. Now, the word for idols here is the word atzav, which is the third word that we've had for idols in these two verses. If you haven't guessed, it was very important to these people to use very specific terms when talking about deity, including pagan deities. And this is something that often doesn't come across in translation, is you can learn a lot about people where they have very complex and specific vocabularies. And you'll see it with things like agriculture. They will have very specific terms for very specific things. And you will see it a lot with religion, where they have very specific terms, multiple terms being used for things such as idols. And these terms all had different meaning and nuance to them. Now, sometimes we don't know what that meaning and nuance was, but it is clear that they had very specific meanings that they would use with these abundance of terms for these things. This seems to put the date somewhere between 722 BCE and 701 BCE, which is when Assyria actually arrives at Jerusalem. Just to give you a rundown of the dates, it was 732 that Syria was destroyed, and then it was 722 that Israel was destroyed, and then it will be 701 that Jerusalem will have them at the gates. So we go on here to verse 12. When the master has finished all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the boastful height of his eyes. Now, some translations keep this in third person here, that he will punish or he will visit. But the Hebrew actually switches to first person here. Now, in fairness, the Septuagint does go to third person, but it's probably wrong. It seems that we have switched here to now where God himself is speaking. So when the master has finished his work on Mount Zion and Jerusalem, it then switches to first person. I will punish the fruit of the arrogant heart or the big heart of the king of Assyria. And so we have this imagery now of the Assyrian king being likened to a large, beautiful tree. And so we have the idea of this is he's going to visit the fruit of him. And he's got these boastful, lifted up eyes like a tree. So the idea here of this tree imagery is going to become important. King of Assyria is the biggest tree of them all. Now, this word for punish or visit, it's the same word that we had back in verse 3, where we talked about a day of punishment or a day of visitation. Same word. And remember, this is a new poem, and it clearly doesn't follow the same format of the previous poem, which had that very distinctive refrain. They are still grouped thematically, and the previous poem never named Assyria explicitly. It focused more on the misdeeds of Israel. This poem seems to be focusing on the details of the invaders. And so we have shifted perspective here to talk more about the invaders, whereas the last poem was talking about the failings of Israel. Now, this arrogant heart or big heart, I want to be clear that that's not a phrase in Hebrew that means anything like the English phrase to have a big heart. That's a positive thing in English. No, in Hebrew, it very much means arrogance. His swelled heart, his overinflated ego is what we're talking about here. That is the type of thing that we're seeing here. Again, this tree imagery, Ezekiel 31:7 actually uses this exact same word to describe the greatness of a tree. We've got definitely this tree imagery going on. We're flipping back to the voice of the king of Assyria. For he says, by the strength of my hand I have done it, and by my wisdom, for I have understanding. He is saying that he is, in fact, a genius. It is because he is so smart that he is in this position to plow through the countryside, destroying everything, removing everything that everyone cares about. I remove the boundaries of peoples and plunder their provisions. Word here I translated as provisions might also mean sheep. It's not a very common word. It does seem, however, that he's looking to disrupt the food supply, that he's removing the boundaries of the people, meaning these are markers that would indicate where people's property left off. So he's destroying their property that they worked for and that they've struggled for, and he is destroying and disrupting their food supply as well here. The word is atud. It's not used terribly often, and we're not sure exactly what is intended by it, but it looks like it's either a type of provision, food storage, or it is a type of a goat or a sheep. Either way, those are food type things. Then we have this puzzling line here that nobody can quite agree on the translation with. Like a bull, I bring down those who sit. Very unsatisfying. The Masoretic scribes were not happy with it either. They proposed a different set of vowels with it, and it's not really clear. The word for bull and the word for a strong one are very closely related. The mighty one of Jacob could also be read as the bull of Jacob. It makes sense. A bull is a great symbol of strength, and the two words are closely related. And so we're not really sure if this is saying like a bull or like a strong one. and then he's going to bring down those who sit. Well, some translations can't figure out what to do with that, so they add something on there like those who sit on thrones. And in fairness, if you're going to sit, why not sit on a throne? But the word thrones is not in the Hebrew anywhere. Now, there are a number of ways that it's been proposed to change this around by just altering one or two of the letters a little bit to letters that often get confused with these. And I think the one that I'm most convinced with is to change it to be'afar, which would be in the dust. That would basically change this to into the dust I will bring down the inhabitants, because the word for sit and the word for dwell is the same word in Hebrew. And so this could be those who sit, or it could be those who live there, the inhabitants. Into the dust I will bring down the inhabitants, I think fits better with the theme. It's a minor correction to the text, and it just translates a lot better. So that's what I'm going with. What do you think? Tell me in the comments. Then we have this great imagery here. My hand has found like a nest the wealth of the peoples, and as one gathers eggs that have been abandoned, so I have gathered all the earth. And there was none that fluttered a wing, or opened the mouth, or chirped. Great imagery here. Now, let's start with my hand has found like a nest. This is very much a mirror of what we have back in verse 10, where he says, my hand has found the kingdoms of idols. We have a bit of a return to that theme there, but now the metaphor has changed entirely. He is collecting eggs from an abandoned nest. And there was no mother bird there, that there was no one who was going to flutter her wings, open her mouth, and let out a chirp. There was no resistance at all. And remember the imagery here of, I've destroyed cities with greater gods than yours. The mother bird is their god. And this is an interesting thing, because this is not the only time that God compares himself to a mother bird. The mother imagery of God in general is a fascinating thing that I've done a couple of other videos on, but particularly the idea of a mother bird who gathers her young under her wings and protects them. This is a recurring theme in Isaiah especially, but throughout the entire Hebrew Bible, of God being this protecting mother. And so the king of Assyria here is saying, I took the eggs, and you don't have a mother bird who's going to protect you. Now, let me say that this is a bad idea. Do not mess with the mother bird. Now, this word chirped, I do want to mention this one because it is a great word, and it is one that is used only by Isaiah. And it's this strange thing that he does where he likes words that have a repeating syllable. The word is soft. We think it's an onomatopoeia, meant to sound like what a bird might say when it chirps. He had talked about necromancers that chirp, and this is the same word as that. And so, yeah, there's definitely a hint here of arrogance from the king of Assyria, asking them where their chirping necromancers are now. But now we turn it back around on the king of Syria. Shall the axe boast over him who hews with it? Or the saw magnify itself against him who shakes it? Like a rod shakes his lifter? Like a staff lifts who is not wood? We have here the idea of the tool is thinking that it is the one wielding the tool. And I do want to point out here that the idea of shaking the saw, bringing it back and forth, that same verb is used on the next line with a rod shaking. And the idea that the second line there is that the rod, rather than being shaken by the person holding it, is going to pick up the person holding it and shake him. Idea of the tail wagging the dog here. And then we repeat it here that the staff is going to lift up the person who is not wood. This is all about this hugely inflated ego that he believes his own wisdom has caused this, his own might, his own power, and he is in for a very rude awakening. For future Gilgamesh here, I just wanted to jump back in and say something that I forgot to mention. I wanted to note that both the axe and the saw are tools that take down trees. And I think this is not coincidence and goes with the imagery that we're going for here. And then in the next part, we talk about a staff and a rod, and these are parts of trees. And it's all about that the axe is talking back to the person who who wields the axe, and the saw is talking back to the person who shakes the saw, and then that the piece of wood itself, the staff, is trying to lift or shake the person who is holding it, the opposite of how that should work. And it comes to a crescendo or a climax here by declaring that that person is not a piece of wood. And I would note that in Hebrew, the word for wood and the word for tree, etz, it is the same word. So basically, it comes to this crescendo here that says, and like a rod would lift the one who is not a tree. And so I thought that was significant, wanted to add it in here. Back to me. Bye. So now we're going to wake up the mother bird. Therefore, the master, Lord of armies, will send wasting sickness among his stout warriors. So we have the military title of the Lord here, Lord of hosts or Lord of armies. He's going to hit them with a terrible sickness. There are some questions around this translation here. Stout warriors, the word here very literally kind of means fat people, but fatness was considered a very positive thing and a sign of health in the Hebrew Bible. And so this is referring to his soldiers being very robust, very well fed. And he's going to send a leanness, a consumption, a wasting sickness among them. So his mighty, strong warriors are going to drain away and fade away. And under his glory, burning will be kindled like the burning of a fire. This is very dramatically said in Hebrew. It's a very highly repetitive phrase. Yakad yakod kikod esh. You hear the rhythm there. His burning will be kindled like the burning of a fire. Maybe we could get it more literal here. His burning will be burnt like the burning of a fire. That's kind of what we're saying here. This phrase here, Yakad Yakod Kikod Esh, that ending there, Kikod Esh, looks like it is a sound play on Kadosho, his Holy One, which we will see in the next verse. Now, this word translated as glory here, it is the same word that was translated as wealth back in verse 3, so another connection to the previous verse. But the idea here of a wasting sickness among his healthy warriors, and then under all of his weight, under all of his wealth, is going to be this fire, this burning fire that is put together. And remember, he's a tree. The light of Israel will become a fire, and his Holy One a flame. And it will burn and devour his thorns and briars in one day. Again, the thorns and the briars. This is an alliterative phrase that only Isaiah uses. Shito ushamiro. These two words, thorns and thistles, thorns and briars, we're not really sure exactly what kind of plants they are, but the phrase is unique to Isaiah. They seem to mean something more than just plants. They seem to be symbolic, just as the king of Assyria here is symbolically being referred to as a tree. These thorns and briars seem to be some type of a power that he brings with him. Perhaps they are his soldiers. Perhaps they are a supernatural force of demons. We're not really sure. But the way he uses the term in Isaiah, where he talks about that people will be afraid of them and that they will need bows and arrows to go up against them. They don't usually need bows and arrows to go up against thorns and briars. There's something special about these. But they will, with this mighty tree, be burnt up in a single day. The glory of his forest and his orchard, from soul even to flesh, will come to an end. And it will be as when a sick man wastes away. Again, this imagery of trees and forests burning up in this incredible heat made from the flame of the Holy One of Israel. Now, this last line here, and it will be as when a sick man wastes away. This line's a little hard to translate because, well, there's two words in it that we don't really know what they mean. They're very alliterative. We have kimsos noses. You can hear the S's in there. Kimsos noses. Well, the word for wastes away looks like the same word we conjectured was back in chapter 8, verse 6. That perhaps means to melt in fear. Maybe. The word noses looks like a word for banner and might mean to gather under a banner. Maybe. But it seems like, given the context here, and not really knowing what these words mean, the idea of melting, and the last word here possibly meaning to stagger or to spare. We think that this is the idea of sick people wasting away from that wasting sickness that was mentioned before. That seems like it fits best here. The idea, either way, I think that King James went with a standard bearer fainting or melting, and that's why, is because we really don't know what this last word is. But I think that it's not really a standard bearer. I think that it is talking about that people are going to be sick and wasted away because it mentioned sending that disease among them. And we talk about that it's going to go from, this is going to be not just any ordinary disease. This is a sickness that touches their very soul. Either way you translate it, though, it's a pretty bad thing, that they are going to be burnt up and wasted away down to their very soul. Then in 19, the remnant of the trees of his forest shall be a number, and a child will write. What it's saying here is what's left over from his trees and this massive forest he has will be a number that is so small that even a child could write it. Now, in our very educated society, sometimes we don't understand what a deep magic, basic math was in the ancient world. Sometimes when biblical stories use large numbers, it could very likely be that we're just supposed to see that and have it represent a number that is beyond counting. Like when we say a bajillion, it's not a real number. Nobody can comprehend numbers that large. It's bigger than what you can imagine. And many times when they use really large numbers in the Hebrew Bible, that seems to be what they're doing. They're just invoking something that's beyond anything anyone could really count to, rather than any kind of realistic estimate. And it's fascinating because as far as we can tell, Israel had no numerals. Like we use the Arabic numerals to represent numbers. They had nothing like that. We've not found any evidence of them using any kind of numeral system. Now, they had some numerals in Egypt. They had some numerals over in Mesopotamia. There is some evidence they may have used some of the Egyptian numerals somewhat, but for the most part, Israel did not have any way of doing real math. They had words for numbers, but they really didn't have any number system. And the number systems that existed in the world at this time were terrible. Go try do your multiplication tables with Roman numerals. It's loads of fun. It wasn't until the Greeks that we started to get numerals that really worked. And if you are familiar with the Hebrew letters having numerical values, this comes from the Greek system and was adopted by Israel into their alphabet after the times of the Hebrew Bible. And so anyone who's trying to tell you that the letters have numerical value to them, I know there are spiritual beliefs that some people hold very seriously. That's fine, but it doesn't mesh with history in any way. Those numbering systems came well after the text was written, so you'd have to also believe that they held significance that the people writing it did not know it held, which, sure. But the point of this is that even a trained scribe would have trouble numbering the trees of a forest. It's just too big to count to. But there's going to be so little left that even the apprentice over here, the little kid, he can go out there and count the trees and write the number down, probably using words rather than numerals, but yes. And so that's where we end this here, is that the mighty tree and his forest get burnt up in the flame of the Holy One of Israel. Very dramatic and quite moving poem about the end of a tyrant and a dictator who has come in to destroy and to exterminate. Till next time, I'll see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a good day. Go check out my other Isaiah classes.